Bow, especially with the hiring process associated with the internal candidates. I'm requesting the Council refer this issue to the Personnel Committee for discussion. As you know, we're still meeting remotely. This is a follow-up to our meeting that we had on July 22nd, and the way I would like to proceed with this meeting is I will make a few comments. I will let Mike Nation make a few comments probably before I do, and then I will pass it to Chief Miller, HR Director Clark, and Chief Executive Palmer and the committee to speak. So at this time, Mr. Nation, do you have anything to say?
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. Thank you, Commissioner Fisher. I guess at this time the only really comment I have is what has been done up to this point from the Personnel Committee. That's the only question I have right now. I haven't heard anything other than this meeting was being held today since the last meeting, so I'm just looking for comments on that.
Thank you, Mr. Nation. At this time, I will go into some of the issues that I would like to address, and then we'll pass the baton on a little bit. Before we get started, I'd just like to state that I ain't certain that this is an issue for the Personnel Committee. I think this is probably something that would be handled better through the HR Department and the Chief Executive's Office. But just to go through, and this is taking me a minute, I've reviewed this, and if you've got follow the letter, I highlighted a few things, and number one question was preference for internal applicants. I personally don't feel there is a preference for internal applicants. One of the questions that Mr. Nation asked is, what do we find out about the hiring process after our last meeting? We found out that the Chief Executive has the final say. The process was reviewed, and the findings were discussed at the meeting over a year or so ago when we had it. And if you go back to the minutes, you'll see that we discussed it in depth and decided that whether it was the number 1 candidate or the number 5 candidate or the 13th candidate, the Chief Executive did have the right to hire whoever he wanted. Code 216070, keeping records by the Fire Commission, and Mr. Nation claims he did not get a response. I don't think that is right. It's not my call, but I would say that a little corrective action would not harm in that. 216370, standards required. Jeff Miller did respond to Mike Nation for 216060, 216070, 216370. He responded, and with Fire Chair Commissioner Stephen MacArthur, he did not respond. I don't know if that's right. Maybe a little corrective action there, but that's not my call. Is the process consistent and constant? I don't know that there is a process or procedure. I don't know what it is. I don't think that that's an objective of the commissioners or the Personnel Committee. I think that is in the hands of the HR Department, and that would be between the Chief Executive and the HR Director, Ms. Clark. Why was there 13 candidates last year and only 3 on the list this year? I can't answer that question. That is something that would either have to come from the Fire Commission or from the Chief Executive. Leslie Clark responded to 216070, Section 216070. There was no response from Ms. Clark, according to Mr. Nation. Ms. Clark will have an opportunity to answer that here in the near future this evening. Why we have the Fire Commission? The Charter states we're to have the Fire Commission. If you look at the Charter 7-3, Section 7-3 states that the Commission, Fire Commission, is to be in service at this time. In reference to HR Policy Manual number 30 and 32 about nepotism, I don't think nepotism has anything to do with this case, has nothing to do with anything that's involved in this case. As far as the complaint against the hiring process. I don't see that involved here. Who verifies any of this information? I don't think that's a call of the commissioners neither. Beth Worm, Michael Nasheim asked Beth Worm, did the Fire Commission follow policy and procedure for the internal search and transfer promotions? It states in there they may, it does not say must. I think that's something that is another one that has to be handled by the personnel department, not the personnel committee on the commissioner's side. And Mike stated that he thought that he should be one candidate. Well, I don't know about that. There could be more. As for the paid firemen working construction jobs on the side, I think there was a clause in their contract at one time. Whether there still is or not, I don't know. But that would be an issue for the chief executive to address. Michael Nasheim's current duties and the comparisons to a firefighter and what he's doing now, there is a lot that shows he has experience to be a firefighter. I'm not certain that that is something that the commission should be addressing. Internal search and periodic audits. Mr. Nasheim brought that up to ensure everyone has equal opportunity and how many have taken place, how many audits have taken place. I don't know. That is another issue I think should be handled by the HR department and the chief executive. Whether the records are reviewed or can be reviewed, I don't know. I think there's some area there that could be improved, but we as the commissioners do not make that decision. Should the job have been posted internally? I don't know. Maybe it should have, maybe it shouldn't have. That is not a decision to be made by commissioners. And an internal post for the fire department states that you should be a union member of IAFF 96 bargaining unit. I think Mr. Nasheim is correct there. No one on the fire department is going to put in for a probationary fireman when they already have a rank. So getting to the point of accountability, I think there is some areas here that could be improved upon. And there are some things that could be reviewed, some policy changes, but I think any policy changes should come from the HR department and the chief executive to the council for review and approval. It should not come from the council to the HR department and the chief executive. That does not seem like the proper procedure to me. So if there is any policy changes or procedures that should be done, I think it would be up to Ms. Clark and Dave Palmer, Chief Executive, Butte-Silver Bow, to submit them to the council for review. And as anything, we can redline them or we can agree and concur. And that is all I have to say. At this time, I would like to ask any of the commissioners on the commission if they would like to add anything at this time. Commissioner Olson.
Thank you, Chairman Fisher. At this time, I don't have any comment that I would like to make. That's all I was going to say. Thank you.
Okay. Commissioner Sorich, do you have any comments?
I do. Thank you, Mr. Fisher. You know, I'm in agreement with you. I don't believe that a lot of this letter should fall under the commissioner's realm of duties. You know, we're more about the policy changes. If we make any changes, I think it should be changes that would affect the county as a whole. You know, at the end of Mike's letter, and I can understand. You know, I can understand his frustrations. I've been in the same shoes. You know, but it says that at this time, I request the personnel committee to expedite the investigation of this complaint or grievance challenge. You know, I don't believe this is the proper place to be doing a grievance or a challenge. It's through the personnel committee. You know, if there is a grievance, it should be done through the internal grievance policy with the executive branch. So I'm in agreement with you, Commissioner Fisher.
Thank you, Commissioner Sorge. Commissioner Shea.
Thank you, Chairman Fisher. Yeah, I think that you did a really nice job of summing everything up. There is an internal grievance policy that is reserved for non-union personnel, and I think that should be exhausted before anything else. I mean, while it might be the role of the council to be upset and maybe outraged at certain things that happen, I don't think we have true authority to change any of this situation. I do think the internal posting policy needs to be cleaned up or eliminated. I've always believed that if it's written, it should be followed, and if it isn't followed, it shouldn't be written. And having a policy that says may in it with this, in this type of a situation, I think can create expectations that maybe aren't always realistic. I do think that any changes to that policy would need to flow from HR to the council. I do believe that that is the natural flow of things. I think that us stepping into this, we don't have the power to start an investigation. I just think it's a little bit out of our scope. And while I really understand Mr. Nation's frustration, and I really do respect and understand the competitive nature of the fire department positions, and it sounds like Mr. Nation really wants to be a paid fireman and would probably be very, very good at it. So I really do hope that he gets a hard look in the future for a probationary firefighter position.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. Commissioner Callahan.
I'm sorry, Chairman Fisher. I just got on. I had some IT problems, so I really didn't hear most of the meeting. So I have no comment at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioners. I see that Commissioner O'Neill is sitting listening in. Somebody's got their mic on.
Sorry, that was me.
Okay. Commissioner Anderson, I didn't notice you here, but being you're here and you are on the committee, I will give you a few minutes to add your input.
You know what, Jim? Go ahead and carry on. I just got logged in. Give me a few minutes, okay?
That'll be fine. Commissioner O'Neill, I see you sitting in. Any comment from you?
Yes, if I may. Thanks, Chairman Fisher. My comment would be I agree it shouldn't come from the council, but if he was having issues of going through HR to, obviously he needs to file the correct things to do that, and policies definitely shouldn't come from us. They need to come from there. But I just hope that policies or anything, I hope it does get addressed in some way, shape, or form. I mean, I guess that's my hope. This fireman situation right now, with the fire commission, it's been a thing since I've been on commission. But here we go again, and it always comes back to the fire. In my opinion, the fire commission, it needs some work. It needs to be dealt with in some way, shape, or form, because I don't know, I feel like there's this ongoing issue with it. If we don't do something, if somebody doesn't do something about it, I feel like in the future, it's always going to be talked about. And I don't have the answer for that today, but that's just my comment. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. At this time, I'm going to invite Chief Executive Palmer. Excuse me 1 minute. Commissioner Shea, you had a comment?
I did. I'm sorry I failed to include this earlier. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I am troubled with the fact that the Fire Commission meeting minutes were not provided because I do believe that they are public record outside of any pressing personnel or private confidential personnel issues. That is one issue that I would like to see looked into because those are public. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. I do agree with you, and I think that's one of the points that I may have pointed out, that it's not our duty, but I think there's a corrective action needed in that area. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioners. At this time, Chief Executive Palmer, I would give you the floor to make any comments you wish.
Well, thank you, Chairman Fisher and Council. This procedure for the hiring process for firemen is spelled out by ordinance, which is different than a lot of hiring procedures throughout the county. The Fire Commission, they should have set policy on how they're running their process. I don't know if they actually have one in writing or not. I guess I'll have to check on that. But the original question from Mike Nation was whether or not there should be preference for a Butte-Silver employee in regards to another job opening in Butte-Silver Bow. And I guess if the fire commission wanted to look at that as being part of their policy to add points for an internal employee applying for a job as a probationary fireman, I think it's up to them to set that policy and to have that in writing. And I don't know, sometimes, the question of whether or not there should be minutes taken and made public during a hiring process. There's a lot of people that apply for a job, Butte-Silver Bow, in entry-level positions, not supervisory positions, but entry-level, where, they might not want their employer or another employee knowing that they're applying for that job yet. So for that reason, a lot of the records are kept confidential because of the personnel issues involved. So that would be a question for the county attorney and legal people on whether or not they should be public record on all interviews for entry-level positions. Typically, they are not. If a person applies for an entry-level position, whether it be an operator or a clerk in the treasurer's office or whatever, those records typically are not made public. And I think one of the problems is that the scores are given out and people, where they're rated in the hiring process or the scoring process for a fire position, in my mind, they should be private and they should not be made public. Because of the statewide consortium that does the testing, these fire applicants could be applying for jobs in Great Falls, Billings, Helena, Butte, Missoula, Anaconda, anywhere that's involved in the consortium. And I think if it was made public where they scored, if they scored number 13 out of 15 applicants in Butte, they might not look favorably on that same person and give them a fair chance in one of those other communities. So I think there's a problem with making the record public, but we can discuss that later. But I think this should be left up to the Fire Commission to come up with a set policy on how they're going to award, if they're going to award, any credit for being an internal applicant, which I understand was the original request in this, and then it expanded into many. As far as a grievance that Mike didn't get hired for a fire position, there's no grievance because no decision has been made. He doesn't know that he's not going to be named as a fireman at this time. So to fire a grievance is pretty premature. But I agree the grievance shouldn't be going to the council and commissioners, but there's a process for that. So that can be handled later if and when the time comes. That's all I have to say at this time.
Thank you, Chief Executive Palmer. You've brought up some great points, and I think they're things that we should all maybe let everyone do their duty and see if we can improve on some of these things. At this time, I'm going to allow Chief Miller or HR Director Clark to come up and voice. Neither one's racing, so I don't know who'll win, but they'll be next. Thank you. Looks like it'll be Fire Chief Miller. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Chief Executive Palmer. I just want to make a couple of points. I guess most of what I think I'm going to do this afternoon is clarify some information. I think that I mentioned it last week. I'll mention it again. Butte-Silver Bow Fire Department is probably the only municipal fire department that I'm aware of that doesn't have a say in our own hiring process. There's reasons for that, and I respect those reasons. I respect processes that are in place. I don't have to agree with them. But a couple things I'd like to point out. One of the things that when I talked to Mike initially, when I mentioned the fact that the Fire Commission is an autonomous board, if you really study the ordinance, the entire selection process for both entry-level firefighters and promotions within the fire department is in the hands of the Fire Commission. It always has been, and I don't know if it always will be, but there was a long period of time where the fire department was never involved in any aspect of the hiring. We developed a good relationship, a good working relationship with the members of the Fire Commission, who then allowed us entry as agents of them, as an extension of them, and that's when the screening committee that's explained. The screening committee is the screening of the applications is actually the responsibility of the Fire Commission. They handed that off to us so that we would have some say, which we very much appreciated. I don't know if a lot of you know, but likewise with promotional processes, we're also involved in the process. They've allowed us to develop scenarios that we put the candidates under, high-stress scenarios. We also are involved in the questions that are developed to ask in the interviews. And I think that all of these things have really allowed us to get better candidates. A couple of things that I want people to know, and I think you all know it. All firefighter positions are highly sought after, and I think, I'm very proud of our department. We have a great department, a great bunch of people, dedicated professionals, well-trained, compassionate, caring. I think people know that. One of the things that we see statewide, and I've seen it, this is my 16th year, and I've seen the level of professionalism and certification and qualification of these candidates in this 16 years. These jobs are highly competitive. These are kids that start out literally when they're 14, 15 years old and work their way through a training regiment to get certified and qualified to be a firefighter. And when we do our screenings, we take those things into account. That's why the criteria for scoring was developed to give those people that put that time and effort, blood, sweat, and tears in, those few additional hard-fought-for points. And I think overall the process has improved. And I think that, my opinion, and I've worked with the commission, I think these people are dedicated to the job that they do. They're as well informed as they can about the job of a firefighter or an officer within the fire department. They allow us to sit in on the interviews. We do not score the interviews, but we can provide technical assistance if there's a technical question that is asked. And I really, my experience has been that they conduct themselves as fairly as possible. Now, with respect to policies and procedures, once again, the fire department is completely separate from the fire commission. We're invited in. They are a group of lay people. I don't know if other commissions and committees have a policy and procedure manual. I don't know that. I've been involved in my professional life in a large number of job interviews, all different types. And I've been invited to sit on interview committees for positions within Butte-Silver. I've participated in interviews for law enforcement officers and promotional evaluations for law enforcement officers. And I'll be honest with you, all the ones I've ever seen, they're all done the same way. I've never seen a huge variation. And I can tell you sitting here tonight that the Fire Commission interviews for both entry-level positions and promotions within the department are carried out in the same manner. They're done in the same manner, and I've never seen it done differently. Obviously, I think the Fire Commission would be open to suggestions. I appreciate all the comments that were brought up tonight. We want the process to be fair. At the end of the day, we want the best qualified firefighters hired for Butte-Silver and the best qualified officers hired to lead those firefighters in Butte-Silver so that if you get a problem tonight at 2 in the morning and we're coming to your house, we're going to know what we're doing and we're going to have highly qualified people, and we do. So I'm open to suggestions. I would be willing to answer any questions that I could. The one comment I'd like to make to clarify on the question about the number of candidates interviewed in the last process versus this process, what we typically do at the request of the Fire Commission members and with guidance from the Personnel Department, we typically submit a certain number of names for whatever positions are available. The hiring pool before, if you recall, there were 5 firefighters hired off of that eligibility list. In this most recent, we had 1 opening. So that's the disparity. There is a differing number in how many interviews are conducted and then how many people end up ultimately on the list. So I appreciate the time to address the committee. I'd be happy to answer any questions that any commissioners may have. Thank you.
Thank you, Fire Chief Miller. I am going to have Ms. Clark, HR Director, come up, and after that, I will have anyone with any questions directed to Ms. Clark, Chief Miller, any of us on the commission, or Chief Executive Palmer, and then after that, I will have Mike Nasheim give one last word, and we will move on from there. Here's Ms. Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher and other members of the Personnel Committee. I appreciate the chance to speak tonight. First of all, I want to state that any recommendations for improvement, anything like that, we are always willing to take that into consideration as far as revisions to all of our current policies and procedures out there. There's nothing that we wouldn't listen to or take into consideration for that. So I also wanted to state that I agree with the majority of individuals in this room or on this teleconference right now that I think that this is an issue to be resolved, not so much with the Council of Commissioners or the Personnel Committee, but more with the Personnel Office and the Chief Executive. So I just wanted to be on the record with that. And then finally, before I have a few statements to make, when this letter was first provided to the Council of Commissioners as a communication, it dealt primarily with the hiring procedures for Butte-Silver, especially when considering the hiring procedures associated with internal candidates. So I am not going to address anything tonight regarding the Fire Commission or selections with the Fire Commission. I realize that this is a portion of that, but I think we need to also look at our overall policies and procedures and improve on those where we can. So I'm only addressing those since that was what the original communication to the Council of Commissioners requested. Just a couple of things here, just for your information. When we hire positions, and we post positions, I should say, we have two different types of positions. We have those that are covered under a collective bargaining unit, and we always follow the posting requirements that are outlined in that collective bargaining agreement. In most cases, positions are posted internal to the membership, and they have preference, and they're posted for a specified number of working days to allow them to apply for those positions. Now, if a department manager or a department director, and with the approval of the union, requests that we post those positions in and out of house simultaneously, we are happy to do that. This happens rarely, and it's only for those positions that needed to be filled immediately to save time and get somebody on board, or for positions where internal candidates are unlikely to apply or qualify. Good examples of these are the probationary firefighters and registered nurses. As it was mentioned earlier, when we have an opening for an entry level or a probationary firefighter, we know that there's not going to be anybody in-house within the fire department or within their collective bargaining unit that would be applying for that, so we usually post those simultaneously in and out of house. And for those that are posted just in-house, if no internal candidates apply or qualify, then we post it external from there. Employees of Butte-Silver that are not covered under the CBA can then apply as external candidates for the position, although at this point they have no preference. There's no extra points given or anything such as any type of preference for their application to those positions. The other types of positions that we post are those that are not covered under a collective bargaining agreement. Right now, department heads may choose to post positions internal to a department only or within Butte-Silver only. This usually happens only when the position is posted for a promotional opportunity or when reasonable expectations exist for qualified internal applicants or candidates. And then the vast majority of our positions are posted external. Employees of Butte-Silver Bow who apply, again, are considered along with the external candidates with no preference. So those are the two types of positions that we post, and the preference for how it's assigned with those under collective bargaining agreements and going forward on that. So the other thing I looked at is I contacted a number of municipalities throughout Montana to get what their policy is on posting positions internally and whether or not they provide internal preference for those positions. The vast majority responded, we do not have any internal preference unless dictated by a union contract. Positions may be posted internally without going to the public. If the position is recruited externally, internal applicants who meet the minimum qualifications are to be evaluated with the total pool of applicants. And this is the practice that we currently practice here within Butte-Silver Bow, and that's how we are currently following that. In addition, I contacted Angela Simonson. She is the individual with MMIA who provides all of our insurance coverage and including coverage on our policies and procedures, not only for Butte-Silver Bow, but for a majority of the municipalities, both city and county, in the state of Montana. So she's quite familiar with those policies that are throughout the state of Montana. And she was able to review a number of those policies that she has copies of through her process of reviewing and ensuring different municipalities for their personnel policies. She reviewed some of the policies she had on file, as I stated, and then she contacted 3 to 4 of the Montana AA cities. Basically, her response was the same, that what Butte-Silver Bow is currently doing is basically what all other municipalities in the state of Montana are doing. There are some municipalities, however, that are giving points during the interview process to individuals who are who are internally employed by their employer at that time. So most of the time, she said they give like 1 point, just basically to give them some recognition for their knowledge of the internal workings of the employer, of the internal policies and procedures, and just generally knowing how the organization works, the reporting structure, the chain of command, all of that. But to her knowledge, no city, county government that she works with provides internal preference at this point in time. Some of the rationale behind, I guess, my opinion as far as rationale goes is Butte-Silver Bow wants to hire the best qualified candidates. And oftentimes we do have some excellent internal candidates who far exceed what's required of the job posting, or even far exceed what some of the other candidates offer during the interviews. And then I guess my other concern is, and Angela kind of weighed in on this too, is that these are public positions, and as such, they should be made available to the public. And again, allowing the hiring manager to hire the best qualified individual for the position. Now, I'm not, going back to the fire position, I'm not talking about that. I'm just talking about positions overall and in general. So right now, we are following basically what every other municipality in the state of Montana is doing. I'm sure, if I could get some other input from some of them, I will be receiving that, and I will share that with you. But that is our process at this point. And as I stated, we are willing to work with the Chief Executive's Office and, in turn, the Personnel Committee and the Council of Commissioners on making revisions and changes to our policy as agreed upon and needed. Regarding nepotism, I don't think nepotism is an issue involved with our hiring practices. We do have a number of individuals who have relatives who are employed by Butte-Silver Bow. It's one of the questions that we ask on our application form is, do you have any relatives employed by Butte-Silver Bow? If so, who are they and what is their position with Butte-Silver Bow? So that gives us an idea from the start, you know, if we have a relative of an employee who might be on the hiring committee or within the department for which they are applying. If the case does arise, we automatically take it to the county attorney's office, and they look into it and make the determination as to whether or not a person interviewing for a position would be, possibly considered nepotism. We do have a policy for nepotism, and it's basically that we follow the Montana Code Annotated and the Butte-Silver Bow Municipal Code. And just for your information, we just recently had a case that we were concerned about regarding nepotism, and before anything was provided to the interviewing committee, the management that was hiring for that position, it was all reviewed and resolved with the county attorney's office before proceeding with that. So another issue that was brought up was whether or not we maintain an audit of our hiring practices, especially with regard to internal preference. We do maintain that, not only for internal candidates, but we maintain an audit for all of our positions that we post and that we proceed with in the hiring process. So Beth Worm in my office, who mainly handles the hiring and recruitment for positions, she maintains a database that includes for all positions everything from who's the vacating employee, how many positions are going to be hired under this position, what the position number is, the title, the wage or salary, the fund that it's coming from, the union affiliation, who's the hiring manager, when it was posted, when it was closed, if it ever made it past the internal process to the external process, how many apps were received, how many apps interviewed, who the new hire was, and whether or not that position was posted or was awarded based or awarded to an internal candidate. And I don't know if you can see this, but it does show what Beth has put together over the last 2 years since she's been working with me on this spreadsheet, all the information on all of our hires in great detail, I should state also. So we are keeping an audit, not only just of the internal candidates, but of many, many areas throughout the hiring process down to who the candidate was that was offered and accepted the position. So that is being completed. As far as internal hires go, from January 1st of 2019 to present, we have hired 41 candidates internally. They've come from a various segment of the employment. Some are within the union, so if you're going from one job in the laborers union to another job in the laborers union. Some are between unions. We have laborers in the RMAP who apply for public works laborers. Some are from non-union positions to union positions, and vice versa, from union positions to non-union. And then, of course, some of them are between non-union position to non-union position. So, but over the last 2 years, we have we've hired internally 41 positions. So I think that's a pretty good record of the opportunity that people have and the process that we follow in selecting our individuals for positions. So I'd be happy to answer any questions if anybody has any.
Thank you, Ms. Clark. Appreciate your input. At this time, I'm going to ask any of the commissioners or the chief executive if they have any questions or concerns. After we do that, I'm going to allow Mike Nasheim his few minutes to visit what he wants to talk about. So at this time, I'm going to ask Commissioner Olson, do you have any questions or concerns for anyone?
I don't have any questions or concerns at this time. I just want to kind of say that I kind of agree with the direction this is taking, and that a lot of it is outside of our area of not expertise, but ability to make those decisions. They lie with other folks. We may need to have a look at the Fire Commission and see how that runs, but I think that's outside of what we're working on tonight. But I have no further questions or comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Olson. Commissioner Sorich, any questions or concerns? Commissioner Sorich says no. Commissioner Shea, any questions or concerns?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to clarify, building on what Chief Executive Palmer said regarding the Fire Commission minutes. I would hope that the committee and everyone else would understand that I was not suggesting that the hiring process be public, because I do believe, for all of the reasons that Chief Executive Palmer stated, that should remain confidential. But there is business that the Fire Commission does talk about that certainly would not reach that threshold of confidentiality, and I do believe that those items should be public.
Thank you, Commissioner Shea. I agree with you. Commissioner Callahan.
Thanks, Chairman Fisher. I don't have any questions or comments, but I do have a suggestion. You know, most of the boards we have that are tied into Butte-Silver, all the boards have at least one or two councilmen on the board. Maybe my suggestion would be if we would add a councilman to the Fire Commission. That's something we could look at. Other than that, I don't have nothing else. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Callahan. I think that would maybe something we could take under advisement, or the Chief Executive could. I see we have two people that are commissioners that are not on our committee, but I will let them address any questions or concerns. Commissioner O'Neill.
If I may.
Oh, excuse me 1 minute. Commissioner O'Neill, let me have Mr. Anderson on here. He is not pictured, but he is available. Commissioner Anderson, you got the floor.
Well, just a couple comments. I'm sorry I had to call in, but I've been listening. I do have a couple of concerns about just how the process, in reading quite a few of Mike's emails, just a lot of the stumbling blocks. And it seems to me, in reading a lot of the communication, that the hiring process, it is set out in stone, and I like that it is set out, but trying to find all the information is rather hard, tedious, and difficult, and I think it kind of discourages people. I think that a lot of the decisions that we've made in the past with hiring has discouraged people, and I think we really need to make sure that when we're hiring, I've gotten some comments, especially last time and from other people, not only for fire positions but other positions, that there doesn't seem to be any rhyme or reason to it. I had a family member who applied for a couple positions, and the job would be up for 1 minute and gone the next, and I just I wasn't paying attention to it. But I think we need to make sure that all of these, like Leslie was talking about, are concrete, that they're there for the X amount of time, and that everything is the same on all of these to kind of keep these from spiraling out of control. I think it'd be a great idea to have a commissioner or something on this, and when I looked through the code and on the documentation of what was required, I wish that language was cleaned up quite a bit from the Fire Commission, because it does leave some holes and discrepancies from what I could find. So there are some issues with that I'd like to see cleaned up, but that's something for another day. But as far as everything else, I just want to thank everybody for their time. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Appreciate your input. At this time, Mr. O'Neill, I'll give you a few minutes to question any concern or whatever.
Thank you, Chairman Fisher. Definitely just some comments on that. I do, again, I feel like there are issues going on being with the Fire Commission and this process. Again, the last two hirings, which this one hasn't been dealt with yet. I know there is a hiring freeze, so that hasn't come forth. But all of my years of hearing about, there's always something that comes up, it seems like, with the fire department. I'm not saying I have the answers right now, but there are issues that need to be fixed, whether it be the Fire Commission or whatever. We have concerns, and we'll have to look more into that. But I agree it's not the Commission's place to be that, but we are the ones to kick and stream to make the policies go somewhere from the people telling us their concerns. So we are the ones that at least need to push for it some way, somehow, and I hope that we stay on top of this. And again, we're 2 for 2 on issues with hiring firemen. That is a true deal. The last time was an issue. In the past I heard it was 10. Last year was 13. Now I don't even know how many it is. I'm not saying what's right or wrong, but it's definitely something that we just can't. Hopefully we keep moving forward, because right now we have something sparked and it needs to be addressed and fixed. That's my opinion. Thanks for letting me talk, Dave.
Thank you, Commissioner O'Neill. Appreciate your input. Mr. Commissioner Mankins, I see you're on. Any comments or questions you'd like to add?
I came to it late, and I apologize that I was a half hour late. So at this time, I have not heard the rest of it, what Chief Executive Palmer had to say at the beginning of this meeting. So I'm going to wait on that until the following. But we all do know that there is something broke within that needs to be fixed, because I'll just leave it at that until I hear more of what and I read the notes with it. But there is something that I'm glad that this is brought to the attention, and I think that we need to look into it a little bit more to see how this hiring process has worked.
Thank you, Commissioner Mankins. Thank you all. Chief Executive Palmer, any comments from you before?
Chairman?
Excuse me 1 minute.
Chairman, Chairman, can I interrupt one more time? Excuse me.
Go ahead, Commissioner Anderson.
Thank you very much. Commissioner O'Neill brought the point up that I wanted to ask a while ago at one of the regular meetings, but it wasn't the appropriate time to ask, so I was not able to. But I know that this position was originally put in on a hiring freeze, but I also know that we had a grant a while ago that we're still bound by, where we had to keep the fire department at the same level that it was at the time we accepted the grant. And so I wanted to clarify that. Do we have to hire this position in a timely manner in accordance to that grant? Anybody who could answer that, I'd appreciate it.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. I am not certain, but I believe that when we took the grant to hire the 4 firemen, I believe we are under the gun to keep it fully staffed, just as we are when we do a police department grant. And at this time, with the 1 retirement, I think we got 1 position to fill. And I don't only think that it's because of the grant, I think it's prudent and it's our duty to keep that fire department fully staffed with the amount of members they have. So thank you for your input. We'll look into that a little further. Chief Executive Palmer, any last words?
Not at this time. I'm fine. Thanks.
Thank you, Chief Executive Palmer. At this time, I'm going to turn this over to Michael Nasheim for some final words. After Mike Nasheim gives his final words, I'm going to make a little comment, and I would like to get a motion from one of our committee members. Here's Mr. Nasheim. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Fisher, and everybody else for their comments. Some of the questions were answered, and a lot of them are still out there. When I read the policy for the recruitment and selection, It states that hiring supervisors and/or selection committees shall be responsible for consistently following the procedures outlined in this policy with all applicants. I know one of the questions I have in my letter is if the Fire Commission follows this policy. And I'm under the impression that maybe they don't, maybe they're not aware of it, but I would still like that answer and how they do follow it. I know the Butte Municipal Code has a procedure for hiring firefighters. However, that procedure, I believe, only addresses the process that they interview and they provide 3 people. It doesn't address if those candidates can be internal or external. A couple other comments I have. I'm just going to kind of browse through my notes I tried to take. As I go through the recruitment and selection policy again, internal search, transfer, and promotion, what it states is prior to the formal posting of a position, the personnel director, in consultation with the department head and or chief executive, may carry out an internal search for candidates with job-related qualifications among present employees who have obtained permanent status. That never happened because, as I addressed that in my letter as well, I am an internal candidate and I meet all the qualifications. The next item in here, as I go through under internal search, transfer, promotion, it states, another section, internal promotion or transfer will have first priority to the extent that it is consistent with the city county's commitment to affirmative action. I understand this policy in that section that internal candidate has a first priority. And going back to the first page of this policy, hiring supervisors and selection committees, which I believe the Fire Commission is a selection committee, shall be responsible for consistently following the procedures outlined in this policy. So I think there's a little discrepancy on what actually happened and what the policy says. The city county is committed to equal opportunity in promotions and transfers. The personnel department shall periodically audit the promotion and transfer process to ensure that equal opportunity is available to all employees. Ms. Clark shared that information. I doubt that that information is made available for public, but I'm just wondering, how do they determine that it is fair, and do internal transfers apply? If somebody transfers internally, do they transfer on their first attempt, on their second attempt, on their third attempt? I mean, how does that work? I guess those are my questions on that. Then when you get into job posting, what the policy says is, if in the opinion of the hiring authority, promotion or transfer is not a viable alternative, then the position shall be posted internally and externally on a concurrent basis. That's another supporting part of my argument, is that the process, to me, it tells me that internal candidate has priority. And if I also address this in my letter, if I'm not a viable alternative, I would like to know what those reasons are why I'm not, so that I can improve myself and become a viable alternative in the future. I would like that answered. And that says that that was supposed to be done before it's posted internally and externally. As far as the posting in the union, if I go to the very back page of this policy, what it states, the very last line, besides, I guess, the last line before people sign it, it says, this policy shall be followed unless it conflicts with negotiated labor contracts or specific statutes, which shall take precedence to the extent applicable. I reviewed the current union contract with the fire department that was just presented to you, gentlemen and ladies, last week. And I reviewed the union contract that was on file before that. And at nowhere in the firefighters union contract was I able to find that they have some stipulations that jobs need to go external. So I still have questions. I just want to clarify one thing. I know several people have mentioned it a few times about policy changes. I don't believe in my letter do I ever ask for a policy change. All I simply ask is a lot of questions about the policy that's in place, about the procedures that happened in place, and I'm just looking for those answers. Some of those answers I believe were presented tonight. However, I think a lot of those answers are still hanging out there. As far as a grievance procedure, back to the recruitment and selection policy, it states, it's on page 125-4, an internal applicant need not notify his or her present supervisor of the application initially. If confirmed as a final candidate, the personnel department shall notify the current supervisor for, among other things, a recommendation. The grievance policy that I received from Ms. Clark last week states that the first step is to notify my supervisor. So when I have one policy that says that I don't need to notify my supervisor, and then I read another policy that says I need to notify my supervisor, I guess what do I take? You know, what is the proper way? And keep in mind, that policy was not available on the intranet at the time. That's why I asked Leslie Clark for it, and I received it. Another question I have is, with a lot of information I've shared about the Fire Commission, I guess I'm wondering why is not a fire commissioner present to address some of these concerns? It just goes back to, my initial questions to the Fire Commission still remain unanswered, even after 3 weeks after this was presented, and I'm sure everybody in the fire department, I'm sure every fire commissioner is aware of it, but why has no fire commissioner showed up to comment on any of this information? And keep in mind, I have never received a response from any fire commissioner up to this point. I guess moving forward, from what I understand, is if I have additional questions, which I will, that the process will be that I will contact Chief Executive Palmer and HR Director Leslie Clark. I'd just like confirmation that that's the next step when I have these other questions. And I'm open to any other questions anybody else may have.
Thank you, Mr. Nasheim. Appreciate your input. I value your concerns. I still believe that you do have some unanswered questions. I don't know that their questions could be answered by the Personnel Committee or the Council of Commissioners. I think you're on the right track with visiting with the HR department and the Chief Executive and seeing where you might go from there. At this time, if there's no other questions or concerns, I would make a recommendation at this time that this Personnel Committee, someone make a motion that we note and place on file this communication and let this move through the HR department, the Chief Executive, because we no longer have any input. As you know, we can't direct anyone in the government, whether it be the HR Director, Chief Executive Miller, the Fire Commission. We as commissioners have no authority to direct anyone to do anything. We are the legislative branch, and we are here to approve policy or to redline policy, and if it comes through that way, I think anyone on this committee will be ready to read it, review it, just as we did the letter and all the attachments. So at this time, if there's any other questions or concerns, I look for words from the committee. Thank you.
I would make a note and place on file.
Second.
There is a motion made by Commissioner Sorge to note and place on file communication 2020-183, seconded by Commissioner Shea. Commissioner Shea. All in favor of noting and file communication 2020-183, yay or nay? Yay?
Yay.
Is there any nays?
Jim put Bill as the nay.
Bill Anderson's a nay. The other 5 are yays. I'm going to poll this vote. Commissioner Sorge, yay. Commissioner Shea, yay. Commissioner Olson, yay. Commissioner Callahan, yay. And Commissioner Anderson, nay. Thank you. We will note and file communication 2020-183, and I wish Mr. Nasheim the best of luck. I think he'll be a great firefighter in the future, and I hope the best for you. Thank you. Thank you all. Mike, best wishes to you, my friend.
Hey, thanks.
Yeah.
Appreciate you listening.
Yeah, thank you so much. As you know.
And if I could just go on record as saying I think this process is tremendously flawed. I thought it was last time, and I continue to see a lot of flaws in it, so I just can't support throwing this communication to bed quite yet. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner Anderson. Your information is well accepted. I'm looking for a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
So made.
Thank you all. Look forward to the Budget and Finance meeting coming up here in just a few minutes.